Communications Officer Park Mingi had been working the night shift for 3 years, but she had never heard anything like this before. The crackling sound from her console made her look up from her coffee. First she thought it was just another broken transmission from a trading ship having engine trouble. But as she listened closer, her blood ran cold. The voice speaking through the static was not human. It was desperate, scared, and barely understandable. The alien was trying to speak in standard galactic language, but the words came out wrong and broken. Still, Mingi could understand enough to know something terrible was happening. Please. Anyone who receives this message. Our world is dying. They are killing us all. They take our children to work as slaves. Please help us. The voice was getting weaker. We are sending you our location. Please. Anyone. Help us. Then nothing. Just empty static. Minji sat staring at her screen, her hands shaking. Slightly, she had heard distress calls before, but this was different. This was not just a ship in trouble or a medical emergency. This was an entire planet crying out for help as they were being destroyed. She quickly ran the transmission through the computer systems. The signal had traveled for weeks through space to reach them. The coordinates showed a star system that human ships had never visited before. It was far beyond their normal space routes, in a region that most people did not even know existed. Computer also picked up other details from the transmission. The aliens called themselves the Kethran Republic. They were a peaceful people who had never bothered anyone. But something called the Vorthok Empire had attacked them without warning. These Vorthok were not just trying to conquer them, they were trying to wipe them out completely. From what Minji could understand, the Vorthok were taking prisoners to use as slaves. They were bombing cities full of innocent people. They were taking children away from their families. The Kethran who sent the message was probably dead by now. Along with millions of others, Mingi knew she had to send this to someone important. Right away. She forwarded the transmission to Admiral Kim Dae-ho, who commanded the 7th Fleet. He was known as a tough but fair leader, who had fought in many battles to protect human colonies. As she sent the message, Minji could not stop thinking about what she had heard. Somewhere far away in space, an entire species was being destroyed while she sat safely in her chair. The Kethran had sent their cry for help into the darkness, not knowing if anyone would even hear it. The computer showed that the Kethran system was not in human territory. Humans had no business getting involved in alien wars. There were no trade agreements, no military treaties, no reason at all for human ships to travel that far from home. It would be dangerous and expensive to send help. But something about that desperate voice stayed with Minji. She kept hearing those words. Please. Anyone. The alien had not asked for much. Just for someone to care that his people were dying. Just for someone to try to save them. Minji wondered if Admiral Dae-ho would even read her message. And if he did, would he think it was worth risking human lives for strangers they had never met? She hoped he would at least consider it, because somewhere in the darkness of space, the Kethran were still fighting for their lives. Admiral Kim Dae-ho stood in his command center, staring at the holographic map floating in front of him. The blue light from the display made the old scars on his face look deeper than usual. He had been fighting wars for over 30 years, and each battle had left its mark on him. But this decision felt different from all the others. The Kethran. The system was shown as a small red dot on the very edge of the map, far beyond any place humans had ever traveled. The distress signal had taken weeks to reach them, which meant the aliens were probably already dead. Something about their desperate plea had stuck with him all night. Around the table, his senior officers were making their arguments. They had been talking for an hour, and none of them wanted to go on this mission. Captain Lee Hun-woo was the loudest voice against it. He was a good officer, but he always worried too much about following the rules. Sir, we need to think about this carefully, Captain Lee said, pointing at the map. This system is 3 weeks away through space we have never explored. We do not know what dangers are out there. We could run into asteroid fields, enemy fleets, or worse. Commander Park. Jinwoo nodded in agreement, and we have no idea how many enemy ships are waiting for us. This Vorthok Empire could have hundreds of warships. we would be walking into a trap. Plus, we have no legal right to be there, added Captain Yoon Sung-min. The Kithran Republic is not part of our alliance. We have no treaties with them, no trade agreements, nothing. If we get involved in their war, it could cause problems with other alien governments. Admiral Daeho listened to all their concerns, but his mind kept going back to something else. He remembered reading about Earth's history, about all the times when innocent people had cried for help and no one had come. He thought about the concentration camps, the genocides, the mass killings that had happened because good people had decided it was not their problem. Sir, Captain Lee continued, we also need to think about our own people. We have families back home who depend on us. Is it right to risk their lives for strangers we have never met? The Admiral turned away from the map and looked at his officers. These were good men who had served with him for years. They were not cowards. They had all proven their courage in battle many times. But they were thinking like soldiers, not like human beings. Let me ask you something, Admiral Daeho said quietly. If your family was trapped in a burning building and you called for help, would you want the fire department to check there? Contracts first? Would you want them to debate whether saving you was worth the risk? The room fell silent. Captain Lee shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The Kithran sent out a distress call, the Admiral continued. They did not ask us to conquer their enemies or solve their political problems. They just asked for help. And when someone asks for help, humans answer. He walked over to the communication console and activated the fleet-wide channel. Every ship in the 7th Fleet would hear his next words. All ships. This is Admiral Kim Daeho. Prepare for emergency jump to the Kithran system. We have received a distress call from an alien species under attack. I know this is not our fight, but it is the right thing to do. We leave in 2 hours. The fleet began moving immediately. 12 heavy cruisers, 30 destroyers, and 2 massive dreadnoughts started preparing for humanity's first deep space rescue mission. The human fleet burst out of hyperspace like ghosts appearing from the darkness. After 3 weeks of traveling through unknown space, they had finally reached the Kithran system. But what they saw made even the toughest veterans feel sick to their stomachs. The planet below them was on fire. Huge sections of the world were glowing red and orange, showing where cities had been bombed from orbit. Smoke clouds covered entire continents. This was not a military battle. This was the systematic destruction of an entire civilization. Around the dying planet, massive alien warships moved in slow circles like vultures around a corpse. These Vorthok vessels were unlike anything humans had ever seen. They were dark and angular, covered in spikes and weapons. Their hulls were painted with symbols that looked like they were made from blood. But the worst part was what the smaller ships were doing. Instead of fighting military targets, they were hunting down civilian vessels trying to escape. Admiral Daeho watched in horror as a Vorthok fighter caught up to a refugee ship full of families. The alien ship did not just destroy it quickly, it played with it first, damaging its engine so it could not escape, then slowly tearing it apart. Lieutenant Commander Choi Soo-min was working frantically at her tactical station, trying to count all the enemy ships. Her face was pale as she read the numbers to the Admiral. Sir, I count 67 enemy vessels. Most of them are focused on hunting down refugees instead of protecting their main fleet. They are using terror tactics. They want the survivors to see what happens if they try to run. The bridge crew listened as the communication systems picked up Vorthok radio transmissions. The alien voices were cold and emotionless as they talked about their attack. But what made it worse was that they were not speaking about the Kithran as enemies. They were talking about them like animals. Sector 7 has been cleared, one Vorthok captain reported. We collected 2,000 breeding pairs for the slave markets. The rest have been eliminated. Another voice responded with casual cruelty. Good work. High Command wants us to focus on the young ones next. They work harder and live longer in the mines. What about the old ones? Asked a third voice. Kill them all. They are useless for labor. Admiral Daeho felt his hands clench into fists as he listened to these monsters talk about genocide like it was just another day at work. These were not warriors fighting for their people or their beliefs. These were butchers who enjoyed causing pain. The communication officer looked up from his station with disgust on his face. "Sir, they are talking about slave quotas and species classifications. They have done this before to other planets." Captain Li Hunwo, who had argued against coming, here now looked ashamed of his earlier words. "Admiral, we need to do something. This is not war. This is murder." On the main screen, they could see another refugee ship being chased by two Vorthok fighters. The civilian vessel was clearly damaged and could barely move. The alien ships were taking their time, shooting off pieces of it bit by bit, while the people inside waited to die. Admiral Deho had seen enough. He stood up from his command chair and looked around at his crew. Every face showed the same mixture of anger and determination. They had come here to help strangers, but now it had become something more personal. "Signal the fleet," he ordered, his voice cold as steel. "All ships, prepare for immediate attack. We are going in." The human fleet began moving toward the Vorthok ships like a pack of wolves closing in on their prey. The aliens had been so focused on hunting helpless civilians that they had not even noticed the arrival of 44 human warships. The Vorthok were about to learn what happened when they hurt innocent people in front of humans. Overlord Dex was having the best day of his career. The Kethron planet below was almost completely conquered, and his ships had captured thousands of new slaves. He was already planning how to spend his bonus from High Command when his communication officer interrupted him. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from unknown vessels," the officer reported nervously. Dex looked at his main screen and saw the human fleet approaching from the edge of the system. He counted their ships and started laughing. These newcomers had brought maybe 40 ships against his force of 67. It was almost insulting. "Put them on the main screen," he ordered, still chuckling. The transmission came through clearly. A human voice, speaking in perfect galactic standard, delivered a simple message. "Vorthok vessels. This is Admiral Kim Deho of the Human Defense Fleet. You will withdraw from this system immediately or face the consequences." Vex burst out laughing so hard that tears came to his eyes. His bridge crew joined in, thinking it was the funniest thing they had ever heard. Here was some unknown species, probably primitive tool users who had just discovered space travel, trying to threaten the mighty Vorthok Empire? "Consequences?" Vex managed to say between fits of laughter. "What consequences could these pathetic creatures possibly threaten us with?" He wiped his eyes and activated the response channel. "Unknown vessels, you have entered a restricted zone during a military operation. You have two choices. Surrender now and join our slave stock, or burn with the rest of these worthless creatures." The human response came back instantly, and it was just one word: negative. Max was about to make another joke when his tactical officer suddenly screamed a warning. The human ships had started moving, and they were not doing what any normal fleet would do. Instead of forming up into battle lines like civilized warriors, they were scattering in all directions like insects. "Sir, they are breaking formation." His weapons officer shouted, "I cannot get a lock on them." Then the shooting started. Everything went wrong at once. The human ships moved like nothing the Vorthok had ever seen before. They twisted and turned through space, changing direction so fast that it seemed impossible. Some ships dove under the Vorthok fleet, others climbed above it, and still others weaved between the larger vessels like they were dancing. "Commander." Anjuan led her destroyer squadron straight through the middle of the Vorthok formation. Her ships were small and fast, and they punched through the enemy lines like bullets through paper. The Vorthok ships tried to turn their massive guns to follow her, but she was already behind them, shooting at their engines at the same time. Captain Park Sunho brought his heavy cruisers around to hit the Vorthok from the side. His ships were bigger and slower than the destroyers, but they packed enough firepower to crack open the enemy's thick armor. The Vorthok found themselves caught between two groups of attackers, unable to focus on either one. "Return fire. Return fire!" Overlord Dex screamed at his crew, but his ships were too slow to keep up with the human attack. The Vorthok vessels had been built for terrorizing helpless civilians, not for fighting real warriors. The human weapons were different too. Instead of the slow, heavy energy beams that most species used, they fired rapid bursts of smaller shots that could change direction in flight. The Vorthok shields, designed to stop big hits, were overwhelmed by thousands of smaller impacts. Within minutes, Vex watched in horror as ship after ship on his display screen turned red and then disappeared completely. The humans were not just defeating his fleet, they were destroying it with surgical precision. "Sir, we have lost 14 ships," his tactical officer reported in panic. "The enemy is using some kind of new combat doctrine we have never seen before." Vex stared at the battle display in shock. In less than 10 minutes, these unknown humans had wiped out a quarter of his fleet. This was supposed to be easy. Was supposed to be fun. Now, he was starting to realize that his empire had just made a terrible mistake. The battle turned into something that Vorthok had never experienced before. They were used to fighting enemies who followed the same basic rules of space combat: form up in lines, exchange fire at long range, and retreat when damaged.
Oh.
But these humans were different. They fought like they had been born for war. While the Vorthok ships stayed in their neat formations, trying to maintain order, the human vessels moved like a pack of wild animals. They would group together for a coordinated attack, then split apart and regroup somewhere else. They used pieces of destroyed ships as cover, hiding behind chunks of metal and debris to avoid enemy fire. What shocked the Vorthok most was how the human ships could move. They pulled turns that should have crushed their crews, accelerated so fast that their engines should have exploded, and stopped so suddenly that physics said it was impossible. It was like watching dancers perform a deadly ballet in the middle of a battlefield. Captain Wan Jun's heavy cruiser, Indomitable, had been hit badly by enemy fire. Half the ship was venting atmosphere into space, and the engine room was on fire. Any sane captain would have retreated or surrendered, but Wan Jun was not done fighting. Root all power from life support to the weapons. She shouted to her crew, "We can hold our breath longer than these bastards can hold their formation." Her crew worked frantically in the dim emergency lighting as their ship continued to take damage. They shut down everything that was not essential: lights, heating, artificial gravity, and fed all that power into their guns. The Indomitable began firing faster and harder than it had been designed to do. The Vorthok gunners watched in horror as the crippled human ship kept fighting. They had hit it with enough firepower to destroy 3 normal vessels, but it would not die. Instead, it seemed to be getting more dangerous as it took more damage. "They are insane," screamed a Vorthok weapons officer as he watched another human destroyer charge straight at his dreadnought. The small ship was already heavily damaged, trailing fire and debris, but it was accelerating directly toward the bridge of the massive enemy vessel. The destroyer struck the dreadnought's command section like a guided missile. The explosion tore through the alien ship's armor and killed everyone in the control room. The human crew had sacrificed themselves to take out the enemy commander, and they had done it with smiles on their faces. This was when the Vorthok began to understand that they were not fighting a normal enemy. Most species would retreat when faced with superior numbers. Some would fight bravely for their homes and families. But these humans seemed to fight harder when things got worse, as if danger made them stronger instead of weaker. Commander Yang Xiajin led his fighter squadrons through the chaos like a swarm of angry insects. His small ships were fast and agile, darting between the massive enemy vessels to attack their weak points. But what amazed the Vorthok was that the human pilots were not just fighting for themselves, they were risking their lives to save the refugee ships. "Blue Leader, you have 3 enemy fighters on your tail," came a voice over the radio. "I see them," Yang replied calmly. "But there is a civilian transport under attack in Sector 4. I am going to help them first." His fighter dove straight into a cloud of enemy fire, weaving between energy beams and missiles to reach the helpless refugee ship. He destroyed 2 Vorthok fighters and damaged a third before his own ship was hit. As his fighter exploded, he managed to send one last missile that finished off the enemy squadron. The Vorthok pilots watching this display were speechless. This human had chosen to die saving strangers rather than protect himself. It went against every instinct they understood about survival and self-preservation. All across the battlefield, similar scenes played out. Human ships fought until they literally fell apart. Crews worked at their stations even when their ships were burning around them. Pilots threw themselves into impossible situations to save people they had never met. The Vorthok Empire had conquered dozens of worlds, but they had never faced anything like this. They were beginning to realize they had not just attacked another species, they had awakened something much more dangerous. The interrogation room on Admiral Deho's flagship was small and cold. 3 captured Vorthok officers sat across from the Admiral, their hands bound with energy restraints. They had been pulled from the wreckage of their destroyed ships, and now they were about to learn something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The first prisoner was a ship, captain named Vex. He had been confident and arrogant when he was first captured, still believing that his empire would rescue him. But as the questions began, his attitude changed completely. "Tell me about your species," Admiral Deho said through the translation device. "How long have you been conquering other worlds?" Vex laughed nervously. "We have been the dominant power in this region for over 1,000 years. No one has ever been able to stop us. Your little fleet got lucky, but reinforcements will come." The Admiral leaned forward. "What makes you think we are just a little fleet?" "'Cause you only brought 40 ships, Vex replied. "Our intelligence networks would have detected any major military buildup. You are probably some small colony that got desperate." Intelligence Officer Yuen Henyel entered the room carrying a datapad. She had been researching everything the humans had learned about the Vorthok Empire during the battle. What she had discovered was disturbing. "Admiral," she said quietly, "these aliens have conquered 17 different star systems. They specialize in attacking peaceful species that have no military experience. They have never faced organized resistance before." Admiral Deho turned back to the prisoners. "Is this true? You only attack defenseless civilizations?" The second prisoner, a weapons officer named Kral, spoke up defensively. "We bring order to chaos, give inferior species purpose through service to the Empire." "You mean slavery?" the Admiral said coldly. "We mean survival," Kral shot back. "The weak exist to serve the strong. This is the natural order of the universe." But as the interrogation continued, something strange happened. The more the Vorthok learned about humans, the more terrified they became. Through the translation device, they heard stories about Earth's history that made their blood run cold. "Your species fought wars for thousands of years," Vex whispered in growing horror. "You fought each other constantly. You turned your entire planet into a training ground for combat." Yuen Hanyul nodded grimly. "Humans have been at war for most of our recorded history. We learned to fight by fighting ourselves." "But why?" asked the third prisoner, a young communications officer named Drac. "Why would you hurt your own kind?" "Because we learned that fighting makes us stronger," the Admiral replied. "Every war taught us new ways to survive. Every battle made us better at protecting what we love." The Vorthok officers looked at each other in shock. Most species in the galaxy had developed space travel during times of peace and cooperation. They had learned to work together to overcome the challenges of leaving their home worlds. But humans were different. They had learned to fight first, then taken those fighting skills to the stars. "Your soldiers," Vex said shakily, "they died. Protecting people they had never met. This makes no sense. Why would they sacrifice themselves for strangers?" Yuen Hanyel smiled sadly. "Because that is what makes us human. We protect the innocent, even if it costs us everything." She showed them the psychological profiles she had compiled. Humans were unique among known species because they had turned their caring instincts into a weapon, where other species fought hardest for their own families. Humans fought hardest for those who could not protect themselves. "Your empire's terror tactics," she explained, "only made us angrier. When we see innocent people being hurt, we do not become afraid, we become dangerous." The captured officers were beginning to understand why their standard conquest methods had failed so completely. The Vorthok Empire had built their success on fear and intimidation. They attacked peaceful civilizations and used cruelty to break their enemies' will to fight. But humans worked differently. The more cruelty they witnessed, the more determined they became. The sight of innocent people being hurt did not make them want to surrender. It made them want to fight harder. "Your species is insane," Drac whispered. "You're all completely insane." Admiral Deho stood up slowly. "Maybe we are. But we are the kind of insane that shows up when someone calls for help." The prisoners sat in stunned silence, finally understanding what their empire had awakened. Marine Colonel Bei Minho checked his armor systems one last time before giving the order to breach. His assault team was floating in space next to a massive Vorthok prison ship, preparing to cut through the hull. Intelligence had detected thousands of Kethran prisoners inside, and time was running out. Remember, he told his soldiers over the radio, "We are here to save lives, not take them. Only shoot if you have to." The prisoners are scared enough already. Cutting tools sliced through the alien metal like butter, and the Marines poured through the opening. The Vorthok guards inside had never seen anything like human-powered armor before. The Marines looked like walking tanks, their metal suits gleaming under the ship's dim lights. The first group of guards opened fire immediately, their energy weapons lighting up the corridor with bright flashes. But the human armor absorbed the hits without even slowing down. The Marines advanced steadily, their heavy boots clanging against the metal floor. "Surrender now, and you will not be harmed," Colonel Bei announced through his suit speakers. The translation device converted his words into the Vorthok language. Instead of surrendering, the guards fired even more frantically. One of them pulled out a grenade and threw it at the Marines, as the explosion would have killed unprotected humans. But the powered armor just shrugged it off. The Marines moved through the ship like an unstoppable force. Their armor allowed them to punch through walls when they needed to. Their weapons could cut through the thickest barriers. But they were careful to avoid hurting any prisoners, even when it meant taking more risks. Civilians located Section 7, reported Sergeant Kim Young-ho over the radio. His squad had found a large holding area where dozens of Kethran prisoners were being kept. The aliens were huddled together in fear, their blue scales dull from stress and poor treatment. The Kethran had never seen humans before, and the sight of armored soldiers breaking down their prison walls terrified them even more. They thought these new aliens were just another group of conquerors who had come to claim them as slaves. But then, something amazing happened. The human soldiers began removing their helmets, showing their faces. Private Nam Su-Yang was the first. To approach the frightened aliens, she moved slowly and kept her hands visible, trying to show that she meant no harm. "We are here to help you," she said through the translator. "You are safe now." The Kethran did not believe her at first. They had been prisoners for weeks, and they had learned that alien soldiers only brought pain and suffering. But as they watched the humans work, they began to understand that these warriors were different. The Marines shared their emergency rations with prisoners who had not eaten in days. They gave up their own water supplies to help the sick and wounded. Some soldiers even took off pieces of their armor to make blankets for the elderly Kethran who were shivering in the cold. Corporal Li Yemen found a group of Kethran children who had been separated from their parents. They were crying and scared, not understanding what was happening. Without hesitation, he knelt down and began speaking to them in a gentle voice, using simple words that the translator could handle. "It is okay," he told them. "We are going to find your families. You are safe now." The children looked at this giant human warrior, still covered in the dust and smoke of battle, and somehow they knew he was telling the truth. They stopped crying and reached out to touch his armor, amazed by these strange beings who had come to save them. All around the ship, similar scenes played out. Human soldiers who had been fighting and killing just minutes before were now carrying wounded prisoners to safety. They worked tirelessly, ignoring their own injuries to help the aliens who had suffered so much. One young Kethran named Vel had been watching the humans work for hours. Finally, he gathered enough courage to approach Private Nam Su-Young, who was bandaging an injured elder's wounds. There was still blood on her armor from the battle, but her hands were gentle as she worked. "Why did you come here?" Vel asked through the translator. "Why did you risk your lives for us?" Nam Su-Yang looked up from her work and smiled sadly. Her answer was simple, but it contained all the truth about what made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. "'Cause you called for help," she said. 3 months had passed since the Battle of Kethrin, but the galaxy was still talking about what had happened there. The story had spread from system to system, carried by traders, diplomats, and refugees. Each time it was told, it grew a little bigger, a little more amazing, till it became the kind of legend that people would remember for generations. On the rebuilt Kethrin homeworld, a massive monument now stood in the center of their capital city. It was made of black stone and reached toward the sky like a spear. Carved into its surface were the names of every human who had died saving their world. Written in both Kethrin symbols and human letters, Elder Kethvorin stood before the memorial every day at sunset, leading his people in a ceremony of remembrance. They would never forget the day when strangers from across the galaxy had answered their desperate call for help. The monument's inscription was simple but powerful, to the humans who came when called. May your courage inspire us to be worthy of your sacrifice. The Kethrin government had also built a powerful radio transmitter that broadcast the story of their rescue to anyone who would listen. They told the tale of Admiral Kim Daeho and his fleet, of the Marines who had freed their prisoners, of the pilots who had died protecting refugee ships. They wanted the whole galaxy to know that somewhere out there, good people still existed. But the most important audience for these broadcasts was not other peaceful species. It was the slaves and prisoners of the Vorthok Empire. In work camps and prison ships throughout Vorthok space, aliens who had given up hope began to hear whispers of the humans who had destroyed an entire conquest fleet. The first revolt happened on a mining world called Drek 7. The enslaved population had been working in the underground tunnels for decades, believing they would never see freedom again. But when they heard the story of the Kethrin rescue, something changed inside them. If humans can cross the galaxy to save strangers, said the revolt leader, a former teacher named Zek Moore, then we can fight for our own freedom right here. Rebellion spread like wildfire. Within weeks, 17 different worlds were in open revolt against their Vorthok masters. The empire that had seemed invincible was suddenly facing enemies on every front. Their military was stretched thin, trying to put down uprisings while also watching the borders for signs of human ships. The Vorthok High Command was in chaos. They had built their power on fear and intimidation, but those weapons no longer worked. Their enemies were no longer afraid, and their slaves were no longer willing to obey. How did this happen? Demanded Supreme Overlord Thax during an emergency council meeting. We controlled thousands of worlds. We had the strongest military in the galaxy. The humans changed everything, replied Intelligence Director Kolvesh. They proved that we could be defeated. Now everyone thinks they can fight us. Throughout the galaxy, other species began to whisper about the mysterious humans. In some places, they were called saviors, the guardians who protected the innocent. In others, they were called monsters, terrifying predators who destroyed entire fleets without mercy. The truth was that humans were both, depending on which side of them you saw. To those who hurt the innocent, they were the most dangerous enemy imaginable. To those who needed protection, they were the answer to every prayer. Back on Earth, Communications Officer Park Mingy was still working the night shift, still listening to the deep space frequencies. She had been promoted twice since the Kethron incident, but she had requested to stay at her post. She felt like she was standing guard, waiting for the next call for help, and the calls were coming. Every week she received new distress signals. From across the galaxy, some were from species fleeing the collapsing Vorthok Empire. Others were from entirely different regions, places where new bullies were trying to fill the power vacuum each time. She forwarded the messages to Admiral Kim Daeho, who was still out there somewhere with the 7th Fleet. She knew that he would. Read every one, consider every request, and respond to as many as he could, because that was what humans did. They came when called, they fought when needed, and they never let the innocent suffer alone. The galaxy had learned that there were people out there who would cross any distance, face any danger, and pay any price to answer a cry for help. The age of unopposed tyranny was ending, not because of politics or economics, but because somewhere in the darkness, humans were listening, and when evil showed its face, humans would be there to meet it.